You know that first cup of coffee in the morning? It's more than just a drink. It's a ritual, right? That amazing aroma that just gets your day started. But what if that whole promise is built on a lie? What if behind those bold flavors, there's a pretty dark truth that most of the major coffee companies are hoping you never find out? Okay, let's dive right in.
So let's just start with a really simple but kind of unsettling question. What if that coffee sitting in your kitchen right now, the one you count on to get you through the day, isn't actually what you think it is? What if it's been secretly cut with things that have absolutely no business being in your cup?
Because get this, according to independent investigations, that's not just some wild theory, it's a reality. Nearly 1 out of every 3 coffees sold today is diluted with chemicals, fillers, and additives that are nowhere on the label. And we're not talking about some obscure brands here. This is happening with some of the biggest names on the supermarket shelves.
So our first stop is the most common kind of deception out there: totally misleading labels. This is where brands get really clever with their wording and use a bunch of cost-cutting shortcuts to sell you something that, well, isn't quite what it claims to be.
Let's take Costco's Kirkland Signature, a brand most of us know is built on being affordable. The package proudly says 100% Colombian, but independent lab analysis found something else entirely: undisclosed synthetic flavor compounds. Now, why would they need those? Well, Kirkland uses a process called flash roasting, where they just blast the beans at crazy high temperatures to speed things up. The problem is, that process completely destroys the natural flavor, so to make up for it, they quietly add these flavor enhancers back in.
And this whole situation just screams red flags. First off, the coffee sells for 40% less than similar brands, a price cap that supply chain experts say is pretty much impossible if you're using pure Colombian beans. Then you've got the Better Business Bureau, which has over 200 complaints about a weird chemical aftertaste. And the packaging? It's deliberately vague, giving you zero real information. The money? The customer complaints? It all points to the same thing. They're cutting costs and purity is paying the price.
But hold on, it gets worse. Let's move on to Walmart's great value, because here we go from just hidden additives to, well, outright junk. Lab tests on their classic roast found that up to 15% of what's in the can isn't coffee at all. It's literally filled with twigs, husks, and other agricultural scraps that should have been tossed in the garbage.
And what's really fascinating here is the why. They also throw in maltodextrin, which is just a cheap carbohydrate filler that costs about 1/10 of the price of actual coffee beans. See, by bulking up the product with junk, they can sell the final can of coffee for less than the raw ingredient should have cost. It's the oldest trick in the book, a classic bait and switch happening right under our noses.
Okay, so fillers are one thing, but now we're going to shift gears to something a lot more sinister, an invisible threat. This isn't about what's been added, but about a chemical that actually forms during the roasting process, and one of the most popular brands in America has alarmingly high levels of it.
The chemical is called acrylamide. It shows up naturally when you roast coffee beans at really high temperatures. And here's the part that should make you sit up. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies it as a probable human carcinogen. In plain English, that means scientists have a very strong suspicion that it can contribute to causing cancer.
So how much are we talking about in a typical cup? Well, FDA testing found that a can of Folgers Classic Roast contains about 458 parts per billion of acrylamide. Now, I know that number probably doesn't mean much by itself, so let's give it some context.
So, over in the European Union, they've set their safety benchmark for this stuff at 400 parts per billion. As you can see, Folgers sails right past that line. And these high levels are a direct result of that high-heat flash roasting method. Yep, the exact same cost-cutting trick we've already talked about.
But this is the part that is just unbelievable. In California, where they have much stricter laws, this exact same can of Folgers coffee actually has a cancer warning label on it. But in the other 49 states, absolutely nothing. The product is identical. Your right to know about the risk literally depends on what state you live in. So, we've covered deception and hidden chemicals. But now we have to raise the stakes even higher to cases where a simple mistake turned a morning drink into a clear and present danger.
Back in January of 2025, the FDA had to issue a nationwide recall for Clover Valley Instant Coffee, which is Dollar General's own brand. The reason? People were finding fragments of glass inside the jars. And this wasn't just some freak accident. Public records show that the factory making it had been flagged for safety violations 3 separate times in the 18 months before the recall. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and to make it even worse, less than 30% of the people who bought it were ever even properly notified.
You know, the dangers can also be invisible.
For millions of people out there with heart conditions, anxiety disorders, or serious caffeine sensitivity, drinking decaf isn't just a preference, it's a medical necessity. They absolutely rely on that label to stay safe. So what happens when that trust is completely shattered?
I mean, just imagine the horror when they found out the truth about the Our Family brand of decaf. Just listen to this FDA consumer complaint. People thought they were buying a safe product, but instead they started having terrifying medical symptoms like panic attacks and heart palpitations. It's just a complete and scary betrayal of trust.
So how on earth did this happen? It was a complete and total failure of basic quality control. The factory used the same equipment for both regular and decaf beans, but, and this is the crazy part, they did zero testing to verify it was actually decaf before they sealed the bags and slapped a decaf label on them. This was pure negligence, putting some of the most vulnerable people directly in harm's way. Also, the company could save a few pennies per package on testing.
So when you start looking at all these cases together, from Kirkland to Clover Valley to Our Family, it becomes painfully clear this isn't just about a few bad apples. This is about a systemic crisis of trust in the entire coffee industry.
A very clear pattern starts to emerge, doesn't it? Brands are hiding fillers, they're putting profits way ahead of our safety, they're exploiting old legal loopholes, and they're using labels that are designed to mislead. And then, when it all goes wrong, they fail to properly warn us. So the big takeaway here is that behind that comforting smell of our morning coffee lies this whole world of shortcuts and cover-ups.
And all of this leads us to one final, really nagging question. If this is what's happening with something as simple and as universal as coffee, a product we've trusted for generations, what else in our own kitchens might not be what it claims to be?